I was just visiting family on the East Coast, and my little nephews have this tradition of playing therapist. And they sit in the therapist chair, and they have the adults on the couch, and they sit with a clipboard, and they ask us what our problems are. And this time, my little 5-year-old was there participating for his first time. And they came to me and they said, what's your problem, ma'am? I said, well, it's not really a problem, but I'm giving this Dharma talk next week, and I'm just trying to figure out what I want to talk about. And so my nephew, who's about 12, turned to my son and said, Kaba, do you have any advice for her? And he goes, I don't think anything. And my nephew, without missing a beat, was like, perfect advice, very wise. Don't think. Your prescription is no thinking. And I didn't really succeed in that, but I carried it with me into this, to not overthink. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Taylor Rechtschaffen. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I'm also an IFS therapist, internal family systems, which is something I'm going to talk about later tonight, and which I think there have been other people who've talked about IFS here for different things. I'm also a certified Feeding Your Demons facilitator. I also know that some of you have done that here. And I've been a meditator and practitioner for 25 years in Buddhism and other lineages. And most recently, I've been leading day-long retreats, teaching IFS and bodhicitta, and the kind of interplay between internal family systems and bodhicitta and other aspects of Buddhism. I just want to take a moment to say thank you to your community for having me, to sub for Eve Ekman. It's such a joy. And I also want to say thank you to the land and to the building and the matter that is here and the people who came before, who lived here, hoping that what we're up to does good here, which I know it does. I am going to talk about internal family systems, IFS, tonight, and teach about it. Has anyone done it or learned about it a little bit, just so I have some general, cool, awesome. And sort of ways in which I have seen through my years of studying both, some really helpful ways that I think IFS can help Buddhist practitioners, and how the things we study in the Dharma can actually help you do IFS even in a deeper way. But before that, I want to sit. So let's sit for a little while. And I will guide us in to sitting, just some good, nice shamatha, calm abiding practice. If you have other practices that you really love, feel free to tune me out and just do what you want to do. And we'll also generate bodhicitta in a moment. But first I want to arrive in our seats and take a little time to really intentionally set up our postures. And just notice if there's anything that feels uncomfortable. And feel free to adjust. It actually helps your practice and helps you feel more aligned and present and have a deeper experience if you're not unnecessarily putting yourself in pain. So just noticing your legs, allowing yourself to make micro adjustments. Notice the verticality of your spine. Maybe for a minute, allow yourself to sit really erect, actually exaggerate the uprightness of your posture and just feel how the spine can lift and stack like a stack of golden coins, they say. And then with a breath, just relax and kind of let go of the strain of that, but maintain the nobility. And at any time throughout the meditation, if you notice mean, it's one thing to fidget and sort of use movement as a way to distract yourself. It's another thing to skillfully and lovingly know when there needs to be some organic movement. And it could be just a sigh where you just kind of let the belly out because you realize you've been holding the belly, or let the jaw drop because you realize you've been clenching the jaw. So practicing compassionate posture with your own body to benefit the effectiveness of the practices that we have been given in the instructions. It's kind of setting up the vehicle so that it runs well. And so now from that place, let's generate bodhicitta, thinking in your heart of that genuine desire that the practices you do tonight and everything we talk about all is in service of the greater good for all beings throughout time and space. May it be so. And so letting the mind come to the breath. Keeping your focus and your attention in this moving and yet single-pointed anchor. Relaxed yet alert and vigilant. Noticing the full inhale and the top of the inhale. Maybe the breath pauses for a beat, and then noticing that exact moment when the exhale begins, and you slide through the exhale to the bottom where there's no breath, and there's a moment of pure stillness, possibly. That little gap. Notice that little gap of stillness. And then allow the breath to organically come into the lungs again, following each little point. And when thoughts come in and your attention goes to them, noticing that that's happened is a real gift. Because in our everyday life, we don't usually notice. And that's exactly what we're practicing here. Noticing that moment where we get swept up in a thought and carried around with it, by it. There's nothing wrong with that, but we want to be in more choice. Because sometimes it's not helpful to ruminate in certain thoughts, and we want to have the strength to choose to come back to ourselves, to our center. So sending compassion and even lightheartedness to those thoughts, knowing that they're part of this interesting phenomena of life, and they're needed and they're helpful, but not right now. Kind of like talking to a little child who wants your attention. I love you, but not right now. Right now, I'm doing something important. I'm strengthening my concentration, my focus, my intention. And use the breath as that object. Notice if you're floating around in thought or memories of the day or plans for the future. And once again, bring the mind back to your chosen focal point, which in this meditation is your breath. Feeling the sensations of the breath in the body. And if anything in your body is tense, just do a quick scan and invite all of your body parts that don't need to be working right now behind your eyeballs, your hands, your feet, just inviting all the cells in your body to be at ease. And then spend your energy on this task at hand of staying with this breath. And let yourself check in with your body and see if your posture could use some realigning. You want to take a deeper breath. If you want to tuck your chin just half a millimeter so that the back of your spine is long. It's it can polish your awareness when you tend to your posture. It can polish the mirror of your clarity. And the opposite is true. If we get a little slouchy and a little bit dull, it can dull the mirror. So finding this balance between deep relaxation and really alert, intentional awareness. Taking this practice for the value that it is, for the treasure that it is. And now I want us to try something. I want you to stop doing everything that you're doing. All the instructions I've given, however you're concentrating, just let it all go and just see what happens. See what you notice. Don't try to focus the mind on the breath. Just let the mind be, however it is. No restrictions. And keep your posture, and you're still meditating, but you've just let go of all the doing to see what happens. See what you notice. Can you notice that there's someone noticing, but not exactly someone? Where is that awareness? And bring the mind back, if it's in the past or the future, to right now. Right now. Thank you all for your practice. So, internal family systems is a modality often used in therapy, but not exclusively, that was created by a man named Richard Schwartz in the 1980s. He was doing family therapy, sitting with an array of people in a room. And I won't go into the whole story, but he had this kind of breakthrough insight, realizing that each and every person has this whole array of parts inside of them, like an unlimited amount of parts, not your family members. Internal family systems doesn't mean you're working with like your mom and your dad, although of course those energies show up. But he identified this thing that wasn't completely new. Carl Jung and different people who did things with different parts and archetypes had been pointing to this, that we're not really a singularity, we're a multiplicity, we're multifaceted entities, and that it can be really useful to parse out those parts and use this model to heal and to transform and to unstick stuck places. In a little while, I want to do another short meditation, if you will, but more of an exercise of going inside so that we can do a little taste of IFS. One of the, so some of the assumptions of IFS. It's the nature of the mind to be subdivided into an indeterminate number of subpersonalities or parts. 2, everyone has a self. Our self is undamaged, unstained, and good. And the self can and should lead our internal system. Now, as a sidebar, I always think it's interesting that in Buddhism, not always, but we talk about not having a self. So this has always been an interesting, I think if Dick Schwartz had had a different word, he hasn't really studied Buddhism. And so I think it's fascinating when I've learned about IFS, how much Dharma is like showing up sort of organically through this beautiful modality. We differentiate self, like when we write about it, with a capital S to kind of, but it's a word that is useful. But I wouldn't pin it down in the way we normally pin down the word self, as this reified, solid ego structure. That actually will get more into the parts. So one of the other piece of IFS is that we have a self and we have a core self, and this self is has qualities that are things like confident, calm, spacious, a lot of things that and maybe you guys can chime in, like I feel when I'm in deep states of meditation, this deep sense of well-being and this deep sense of compassion and okayness, both for myself and others. And in IFS, this is what we find when we unblend from parts. So one of the main principal actions in IFS is this action of noticing when we have a challenging emotion, thought, memory, trauma. We could say, like in Buddhism, we talk about the hindrances and the kleshas. The thing is, though, about when we talk about parts in IFS, they're not bad. Sometimes I think hindrances get sort of pointed out as bad, like you're getting in the way of my awakening. Parts aren't bad. There are no bad parts. They're the result of our life, of our ancestral stuff too. We carry forward ancestral belief systems, wounds, baggage. We call those ancestral legacies in IFS. And the idea is that when we can unblend from them and actually have self, or self energy, sometimes we call it self energy, which is slightly different than saying self. So, but it's the same, that is what it is. We're talking about self energy, when that core essence of who we are, which is basic goodness, which is actually Buddha nature, when that can be revealed, like the clouds moving away from the sun, there's so much healing that can happen, and insight and change and choices, different choices made when the parts of us that are, say, our anxiety, or an anxious part, or parts that's feeling anxious, or a part that's feeling despairing, or a part that's feeling enraged, or a part that's feeling so stressed out because I have to take care of everything. When we can notice that that is a part and not just who we are in this like mushed up jumble of different parts, and get some space from the part, even like as if you're putting it on a cushion across from you, like in Feeding Your Demons, we do that. We take a part and we're like, I'm going to work with you right now, really intentionally. Can you please sit on this cushion in front of me? Then a relationship can happen, and a transference of compassion, of curiosity, of listening can happen. And that's the beauty of IFS. It's this system of understanding that we are a collection of self and parts. Some of those parts we call protectors. Some of them we call exiles. It's not like you could delineate them, but often when I'm working as a therapist, or when I see really skilled IFS teachers working, they don't even really, I mean, in terms of teaching, like understanding it and learning it, it's helpful. And depending on how your mind works, it can be really neat to know, like, oh, these are protector parts, this is an exile, and this is the type of protector part. And we can talk about that a little bit, but the point is when you unblend from a part, whatever part that is, when that part is in contact with that self energy, which is, the self energy is non-judgmental, doesn't have an agenda, is not trying to fix or change the part. It wants to listen. It wants to understand the fears and concerns of the part. It wants to understand if that part is being, inadvertently bullied by other parts. Or, because often parts, obviously, you could imagine if you get in there, look at maybe an issue that you're dealing with, you're like, well, there's this part and this part and this. Oh, and then there's the part that just really doesn't like any of it and just wants to get away from it. But generally what we do, instead of seeing that happening, is we just are acting as the part. And we're reacting as the part, which then sort of perpetuates cycles, Example, should I give an example? I think that's sometimes helpful. I haven't planned the example, but this is the first one that comes to mind. So someone, let's say, who throws themselves into work, they're kind of like working really hard, and they've got, trying to keep everything organized, trying to do everything right. and they're stressing themselves out. They're kind of running and living in their manager parts, which a lot of us do. Manager parts are very socially acceptable. They're kind of who we want to be seen as in the world. I'm responsible and I think well and I have my shit together. And there's nothing wrong with that inherently. But when a part is in its extreme role, where it's like in that way to the point where it's stressing you out, other parts will come in to kind of like save you from yourself. So you will then, that person, let's say, goes and has 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 drinks on the weekend, and has their firefighter part. And it's called the firefighter part, which is a little weird when you first hear it, but you think about a firefighter surveys the scene. It's like, this is crazy, I gotta save that guy and rip him out of the building, I don't care why or what happens. So firefighter parts are the parts that kind of come in to kind of almost release the pressure valve that the managers have put on us. And there can be healthy, like if you worked with your firefighters, and like, I understand. So we spend a lot of time wanting to know, what are the core intentions of parts? So if we actually sat with that firefighter part and really listened to it, that has this person drinking to excess, we might find out that underneath that, and this is kind of getting to the feeding your demons work, where you ask a part what it like really, really needs, how it would feel if it got what it really, really needs. It's like, what I really want for you is just like to feel good and happy and relaxed. That's what I really want for you. But what it's doing is kind of the impulse to go drink a lot. So firefighters and managers, protectors, are ultimately protecting us from the more vulnerable feelings, the more vulnerable beliefs. The exiles are our parts that hold past memories, traumas, beliefs. One of my favorites is not good enough, not being good enough, or being bad, or not being loved. I say favorite because, yeah, being sarcastic, but yeah. And so, yeah. And so managers and firefighters in their different ways protect us from getting overwhelmed by those exiles. But what happens is those exiles sort of never get our full, undivided, loving, compassionate attention. All parts benefit from getting self energy and sitting with self and having self listen, hear, and connect with. Sometimes just that act alone, the part relaxes and there's like a less of a need to act to be that part. So we want to listen to parts. We want to even speak for parts, like speak up for parts, but we don't want, the idea, the hope is to not be always blended with parts. Am I dumping too much information? Okay. All right. Okay. So, hold on, un momento. I kind of want to go back to elaborating on self and self energy. This idea that our core, who we really are, is the basic goodness and is awakened awareness and is free and is spacious is really important, I think, in Buddhism and in VFS. And I'm going to read you guys some of the words that in the classically, when we teach IFS, there are the 8 C's, as in the letter C. That is just kind of a cute way to remember some of the qualities of self. We've got compassion. So self is compassionate. Yourself is compassionate. When you're not blended with parts, and you can unblend and have them like outside of you a little bit, or get a little bit of space from them, and you do the U-turn where you look back, like what's still there, that self can be. It's not always just compassionate 24/7, but like that's one of its qualities that's inherent to it. Curious, clear, there's clarity, there's creativity. There's a calm, there can be calm that's noticed. There can be confidence and courage and connectedness. And then there are 5 P's, in case those weren't enough for you. Presence. There's presence. There's persistence. I like that self is like, it's not going to give up. It has staying power. Perspective. Self has perspective. Your self has that capacity to have perspective and to hold multiplicity and to hold nuance. And when it's talking to polarized parts, not like take sides, but be like, I get you and I get you. I get why you're working so hard to prove yourself that you're good enough. And I get why you go drink, because yeah, that's like the only tool you have to feel good. And I get that you're both totally afraid of falling into shame. I get it, so there's perspective, there's playfulness, and there's patience. And then there's a lot of other ones, and we could talk about that. But the idea that when we unblend, if you notice, and this is the exercise that I'll do with you guys in a little bit, an unblending exercise, where we practice unblending, and I'll guide you, but the idea is that when you unblend, you sort of feel into yourself. And unblending, is anyone totally confused when I say that? Sometimes I feel like I need to over-explain things, especially unblending for some reason. If anyone has done the feeding your demons, it is really helpful, because you do this kind of like, putting it on a cushion. So when you unblend and then you check for self-energy. So you check and you go, how am I feeling towards this part? How am I feeling towards this anxiety or anger? And if there is resistance or rejection or anything but compassion or worry, like I'm afraid that this part is making me a bad person or an annoying person or a unconscious person or whatever, then that's another part. And so this can sound a little bit like laborious, but when you learn it, you can kind of be a little bit like, you can almost be like, oh, that's another part. Hey guy, I love you. Like, hold on, just one sec. I need to connect with this part. And you kind of just unblend from that judgmental. You're like, I get it. I know. I see that you don't want this guy. Hold on. And then you check back in. How do I feel towards it now? And you're like, oh, I actually feel really spacious and available. So when you feel self-energy towards a part, in my experience, that's half the battle. There's all sorts of ways that we can like talk to the part. All sorts of wild, crazy things can happen. I mean, it gets shamanic, you guys. Stuff happens that's so profound. I've had people say like, I'm doing this amazing shamanic therapy. I'm like, what is it? Oh, IFS. I'm like, and so because when you are in self-energy, there's a creativity and a playfulness and an organicness where the part can be like, I need you to hold me, or I want, like, anyway, I won't sort of tangent there, but anything can happen in that imaginal realm. And then the parts also don't feel bad. They don't feel like they've been doing anything wrong, because here you are ready to play with them, ready to listen to them, ready to sometimes, just be with them. Sometimes just your presence with a part is what it needed. I'd say a lot of the time, that's what it needs. And any questions so far? I could go into some like more details about. Yeah. Do you want to use the mic so that people?
So just on like the core self, is it fair to say like the eight C's and
Qualities,
and five
5
P's?
P's.
They all sound like good, but is it fair to say that each one of those has a polar opposite, and that's part of the self?
No.
No? Okay.
Good news.
Because
No.
it sounded like it was, that sounds too good to be true.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about when the Buddha said that basic goodness is like an inherent you're basically good. Well, you have so let's just use an example. So like let's say confidence, self is confident. So then does that mean there's insecurity? That would be maybe the opposite of confidence. So wonder your question being like, where does insecurity come in? Because we all have insecurity at times, yeah. So we would call that a part. Yeah, it's not a core quality of who you are. And yet it's not to be shunned or even like made to change. That that part that feels so I've also come to learn both. I mean, it's interesting because there's the learning that I get from actually taking courses and doing the trainings, but then there's the learning just through doing it as a therapist and as a practitioner, as a client. It's like each part is a universe in and of themselves. And when parts are unburdened, so when they're listened to and freed up from some of the stuff that they've been carrying, some of the negative belief systems or fears, a lot of times what we often do, always do is find out what a part's fears and concerns are. Tell me, like, what are you afraid would happen if you weren't doing your job? And we find out, like, I'm afraid you'd like, lose your job or something, or and it's like, oh yeah. And so there can be it's almost like you're bringing a wise, compassionate adult into their room with your parts that have varying degrees of arrested development, because they don't see that, like they don't feel wise, they don't feel your wisdom. The part is sort of, yeah, believing that, believing a story that you can't do it or whatnot. And so parts, when they're listened to and their feelings are integrated into the system and like under accepted and not shamed, the parts actually get to be their unburdened versions. So managers get to be really skillful badasses who get a lot of work done, but there's a lightness to it or a playfulness. They almost take, the parts almost take on more self energy. Self energy just infuses the system more. Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a question. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
So
Hi.
how do desires fit into these parts? For example, like I don't know, desire for sex or desire to be rich. Like are these one with parts, or is it like one part with just desires in general, or
I
like
love the question. I love the
maybe?
question. I'm actually assisting in a training. I took the training and then I was asked to be the assistant, and it's called the Bliss course, and it's taught by an IFS therapist and sex therapist she's in the East Coast, Patricia Rich. She also taught at the IFS conference. That's how I found her. And she's sort of codified the 6 S's of self. And those are aspects of self energy that are, and additionally, that like when we're in self energy, there's safety. There's also sensitivity. There's sensuality. There's steaminess. There's, what's the other one? Spaciousness and satisfaction. So she's really, which it's a real like interest and love of mine in particular to recognize, yes, that the self energy also includes or manifests of or can have like this life force energy of desire and passion. I think that when there's craving, we talk about craving and aversion in Buddhism. I'm going to assume, make a big leap of faith here, that we know the difference between this like alive, generative feeling of sensuality that is, or desire that is life affirming versus, and you could follow up with a question, or, is there a concern? Like, I could ask you, I could use IFS, do you have a part that's concerned about whether your desire would cause harm in some way? Because that's then where we would go. We'd be like, aha, okay, so you're finding the places where is there another part that's like afraid? And then you would actually, we would unpack that, and we would find out, like, is there something specific that is afraid of, infidelity, or I don't know, like, what would be the harm? But like the essence of desire, of passion, of sensuality, I love how Patty is like naming that's part of self energy.
Right, but desire is so complex. Like, okay, sensuality, okay, but desire to get rich or to be successful, like that's kind of another.
Exactly.
So there's like
Yeah.
another part, or is it, or you have to like unpack there and do the same investigation and see, or
Yeah.
what?
If there's any way that it's causing anxiety in the system, like let's say you have a desire to get rich, but if there's another part that is afraid that you are being XYZ, greedy or something, then boom, there you have like a really useful like corner of your psyche to work with. And often doing IFS, you discover answers or pathways that you hadn't even thought of before. Your parts kind of tell you things, and you kind of learn things and discover insights from bringing self energy to your parts. In particular, the parts that are distressed about something, that are worried about what this means. Yeah. Okay, I hope that answered your question. Did you have a question still?
But I guess you're probably going to get to this. But how do you get to when you were saying unblend and recognize the parts? Is that what you're going to talk about next?
Yeah, like how do you get to it, meaning how do you do it?
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's a somatic practice. So I'll lead you guys in it right now.
Okay.
I could give you a little just mini intro, which is that you're gonna pick something that is in some way, stuck or frozen or inhibiting you from feeling happy, For sure, you could do IFS kind of with any thing that you're interested in, similar to feeding your demons. If you've done that, you can actually work with something that you're happy about. Anyway, so we're going to pick something, and then we're going to feel it in the body. That's where we're going to start. We're going to feel it in the body, and we're going to focus on it. And yeah, I'll lead you through it. Okay, let's do it. It's time anyway. So take a minute to close your eyes and feel or think or feel for an issue, a challenging or uncomfortable or painful sensation or rumination, kind of similar to the feeding your demons beginning. And find this thing in or around your body. Maybe it's not even a sensation. It actually could just be a sense of above your head or in front of you or behind you, but just finding something. It can't even be a physical pain. If that's like overbearingly present, you can do like a shoulder that hurts. But I kind of recommend to do something that's like an emotional. So we're gonna call that a part. And that's what's meant by a part. So notice, see, and this might take a little figuring out, but just try right away. Notice how you feel towards the part. Notice how you feel towards the part. That's a very specifically created sentence because it establishes a relationship, or it can establish a relationship. It will eventually establish a relationship. If it feels impossible, if you just feel like the part is you, imagine if you could just ask it to give you a tiny bit of space so that you can be with it versus being it. So notice how you feel towards the part. And if how you feel towards the part is some form of reaction or rejection or fear, then that we're going to label that as another part. And we're going to see if that other part or parts would be willing to just temporarily hold off and maybe sit to the side. Sometimes parts will actually, like in your imaginal realm, like pull up a chair and kind of watch you doing what you're doing. Or not, just. But we're going to go back to that original part or issue. And again, see how you feel towards it. And again, if there's still a resistance or frustration, or I can't do this, or I don't know what she's talking about, that's another part or parts. See if those can give you a little bit of space and sit off to the side, or just be a little bit away from you so that you can come back and look at the original part. And again, notice how you're feeling towards it. And here's where we want to check for self-energy. If there's some curiosity or softening or spaciousness, calm, then that means you don't need to be in self completely. You just need a critical mass or a critical quantity of self-energy. You just need to have some self-energy that's, like moving towards the part that you're curious about, that you're wanting to get to know more about. You're wanting to help the system get unstuck, because something about this issue has you coming up stuck, or in pain, or in a cycle that doesn't feel good. Take a nice breath. And so after we've found the part, we're feeling into it, we're feeling it, focusing on it, find, focus, feel towards, and we're befriending it in a way, because we want to show the part that we are here, maybe for the very first time, with this quality of attention, and not just attention, but like with this quality of presence, where there's some curiosity without an agenda and without trying to change the part or even figure out the part, just showing up. So we're befriending. And then we want to find out a little bit. So there's a myriad of ways to do this, but for this evening, we're just going to let the part know that it's done nothing wrong. You just want to get to know it a little bit more. It doesn't have to be alone. It doesn't have to be judged. You're not judging it. It might have other parts that typically judge it, but you've asked them to step aside. And if those other parts come in, sometimes there's a repeated act of needing to ask them to step back. If they really won't step back, those judging ones, we would pivot and make that the target part for a session. But because we're just doing this little experiment, I'm not going there right now. I'm sort of giving you guys a taste. So here you are with this part. See if there's anything, just ask if there's anything it wants to show you or tell you about what it's doing, about what its job is in your system, why it is doing what it's doing, not in an interrogating way, but in a really like wanting to understand where it's coming from. So you actually directly ask it and then you wait and see what arises. What do you do for me? Is there anything you want to tell me? What are you afraid would happen if you weren't doing that, if you weren't doing your job? Do you have any concerns about what might happen if you don't do that? And that question can sometimes, is often, if the answer to that question can sometimes show you that there's a vulnerable part underneath the part, or maybe the part is the vulnerable part. Since we're just doing a short exercise, you're just sort of listening and hearing, and maybe letting, if vulnerabilities are arising, why don't you let those parts know that you hear them and that you want to and you intend to come back to them, maybe in your own therapy or in journaling. And thank the parts. Thank all the parts that have showed up, that have stepped back. Thank them for trusting you a little bit to kind of untangle the system that they've been stuck in. Okay. Make your way out as slowly as you want. Maybe take a few deep breaths. Take your time coming back. Everything that you've sort of touched in on is still there, and you can come back to it if you need to. I'm aware that that could have brought up really vulnerable, sensitive material for people. And that was sort of like going into the like entryway and maybe the beginning of the first room of the house. So there's more possibilities, more steps. There are specific things that we do when we get to like core vulnerable parts, often, not always, but can appear as young because they're often things that we sort of swallowed hook, line, and sinker when we were little. Not always, but or younger, and those parts are carrying burdens, like carrying belief systems about you, about the world, that we can actually help them put down. And we actually use the elements to do that. We actually in IFS we use fire and water and earth and air and light. The Grand Canyon, like people will kind of know like this needs to get buried like here, and we will, you know, in your imaginal realm, or this is sometimes called self-therapy, because when you learn it, you can actually like create a container and do a session with yourself. And so, yeah. So we're not going to get to like unburdening right now. I would love to hear if there's anything that came up for people that they have questions about or challenges or, yeah. From that demo, from that experiential. Is that a hand? Oh, it's a hand, yes.
It's a hand, yeah. Yeah, if you can give more hints on how to take more space with the part, so how to get dissolve that identification with yeah. Like maybe some simple techniques. I guess it's complicated. Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, when you're working with someone else, you know, when you're in a dyad, when you're getting someone else's help, and often when you're learning IFS as a client, you're getting what's called a lot of direct access. Sorry, that was said incorrectly. What I mean is the therapist just is embodying self as much as they can, and they are bringing their self energy to you as the part. So they'll even say to you, like, don't unblend, just be that part. You don't have to unblend. You don't have to summon self energy. In theory, you don't have to summon self energy. It is there all the time. This is why this kind of the magic of unblending, it's like, oh my God, this profound ally, this wise, calm, clear, confident being was here all along. And I can bring that, which is me, to all these parts of me that are wounded or scared or sad or frustrated. But it does take practice, and I'm not an expert. So what would you do? So it's a really good question. What would you do if you didn't have like an IFS therapist to basically be that dyad with you? Because IFS is almost like you're creating your own, you know, dyad. You have self and then you have your part. I would do, when I've had that conundrum, think you could try doing like micro space. So if you're saying like, I can't get space from the part, which I think I hear what you're saying is what you're saying. Imagine you could have like a centimeter or an inch of space. Like sometimes I even tell people to lean back. Seems kind of like, how would that make a big difference? But it's like, I am the part, I am the part. And if like, you sort of surreptitiously like lean back, as if you could kind of like morph out of the part, I would be, and it's funny because even trying that is self energy being playful and creative and persistent. And, you know, so I would just say stick with it, because the self is there, you know, and it might take longer. I mean, that was only 10 minutes or, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, as I think about it with feeding your demons, I was wondering if I'm sure it happens, like the God demon, if that shows up in IFS and how you deal with that. And if in IFS you use a lot of like Gestalt therapy with the parts, like you kind of would in feeding your demons. As like, do you dialogue with it ever?
Totally.
You do.
Yes, yes. Good question. Yes. Yes, you do. And once enough unblending has happened, because a lot of the time when you're like, oh, I want to work on this issue of my anger or my like often there's another part that's just like right there, kind of like, I want to be part of the action. Like, I don't like this guy, it's bad, da, 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 and it's often unconscious. And so this is why the slowing down and being like, are there any other parts that have feelings towards this part? Because it's important for me to know that, because it's filling the conversation with a lot. It's like in a family therapy session, if everyone's clamoring at once, beating up on the identified patient, a good therapist would be like, whoa, 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 why don't you guys actually step out of the room for 5 minutes? Because I want to listen to this kid. Or so, yes, okay, yes. So the question, so once you've unblended enough and you're like, oh yeah, I'm in self energy, I feel like I have all the time in the world, I have care and curiosity for this part, then yeah, that's where totally dialogue can happen. And it's not as structured as feeding your demons. I both like it and like, I see the pros and cons of both. I love in feeding your demons just the like, oh, I just need to follow this script and it's really effective. And with IFS, I think it's depends on the practitioner and it depends on you, like what questions you ask. I use the ones like, what job do you play for me? Are you like, what do you do for me? One question is almost always that's part of the IFS sort of model is specifically asking the question, what are you afraid would happen if you weren't working so hard to do what you do? Or what are you afraid would happen if you weren't behaving the way you do? Or, you know, or do you have fears or concerns about, yeah. Because that then shows like its motivation and its intention. Not its intention, because its intention is often, yeah, like, I want to take care of you. I want to make sure that you're successful or you're good, or, you know. And then, yeah, then you might talk back, oh, wow, I hear that you really want me to be successful and to feel good. And then you actually might like be like, I really appreciate you. Thank you. You know? And parts often are like, they melt. They're like, oh my God, they've never been talked to that way. And then like then they might be like, I don't actually want to be like this anymore. I would rather, you know, be a little more spontaneous. And so then like just sort of really alchemical transformation can happen. Yes. Thank you for that question. Because yeah, the dialogue can happen. And the key thing to watch for, I think, is like, do I have an agenda? Is there a secret little manager part that's coming in here trying to like fix or do? And there sometimes the most subtle effective moments in therapy or in personal work is noticing self-like parts. And self-like parts are a part that knows the script and knows about being compassionate and actually kind of is, but there's some stickiness, there's some agenda. It's like that part wants it to heal. It's like, oh, and so we do, so we'll pause, turn to that part and be like, I so get how compassionate you are and how much you care. And can you just step aside a little bit and let me just do this and be with this? There's this real, this is why I like its interface with meditation, because like I was guiding you guys in the posture around, there's this fascinating paradox of deep relaxation and profound alertness and awakeness. So self is very much present, very much capable in any given moment to act or do, and yet there's a total freedom from agenda. There's sort of lack of attachment in a way. It's so paradoxical.
And so is it right to compare self energy to sort of just the clear light, all knowing primordial wisdom?
I think so,
Is
but
that
I
where
haven't
you-
heard a
I mean,
lot
it
of
felt
people
nice
talking about
to-
that.
To
Yeah.
rest in it like, and not dialogue with it like you do in Feed Your Demons, where it was like, oh, you just can relax. And
See that last part? You said you relax into it and
oh, I liked being with the part and not having to like give it form and dialogue with it, where it could just kind of rest in clear light or
presence.
awareness. And it was nice.
Yeah.
You know, it was not, I didn't have to like really start thinking about the trauma and where it came from and if it was answering or if it didn't want to. And I was
Good.
just like, you know, I've
Good.
lived with you for a long time. I know what
Yeah.
you are. And, you know, it's nice for you to just
So good.
be here, I guess,
So
too.
good. Yeah. No, beautiful point that you pointed out, and like that, and I mentioned it, but you are highlighting it, which is that there's honestly, I think half the medicine is what you just said. And I've learned this after 10 plus years of doing IFS, because I have my therapist manager parts that are self-like, that are like, we should be healing. But I'm learning like to, when you actually can feel self energy towards a part, just hang out there. It might not be all you do forever, but you don't need to know about that. If that felt intuitively right and the part was like, oh my God, thank God, perfect, just dwell there. Maybe next time you go there, you use IFS, you do something, there's like maybe, but yeah, more dialogue. But I think that's can be missed with people who maybe don't have a meditation practice, the capacity to just like have the presence radiate into the part. It's like the nectar flowing. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the dissolving and resting. We have about 15 minutes left. Yes, but yeah, I'd love another comment or question.
So this has been really, really lovely. And when you work with a skilled IFS practitioner, I have had the good fortune to co-facilitate substance use disorder groups with someone who was very skilled in IFS.
Wow.
And she didn't do feeding your demons, she did IFS, but I had a background in feeding your demons. So we worked really well together. So I see how they are complementary.
Yeah, cool.
But could you bring it home for us? Because you also indicated that you were going to bring in the bodhicitta.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Beautiful question. Let's see if there's anything else that I like knew I wanted to say. Yeah, I love the question, and I don't have. I mean, when I teach when I've taught my day long, a lot of the people aren't Buddhist practitioners, so it's kind of this idea that we have a nature that is capable of being a warrior of compassion, and that it's cultivatable. Again, it's sort of new to me. I'm finding my way with articulating, what Dick Schwartz, the creator or sort of developer of IFS, has he created, and a lot of people have added to over the years. I feel like he kind of helped me and helped many people sort of find a way through unblending to sort of reveal this core nature of deep compassion that's already there. So we do need to work on it to cultivate it. So you have like the bodhicitta, awakened mind, alert, loving mind, things that you do that actually like cultivate that. And I think that doing those practices that a lot of you probably know and have been studying, that strength, that's self. I think that's self. And it, yeah. So I'm curious if you have any more. I feel like I want to give you something that you're looking for. Maybe you have a thought that you want to share with us.
Well, maybe we could workshop this.
Yeah.
So the term psychology, right? Okay, psyche means, it translates literally as, anybody? Soul. Okay. And so when I work with people who, like you say, they're not Buddhist practitioners, or they have issues with the concept of the soul, I say, well, do you have a self? And then everyone's, I got no problem. I got a self. You know? And then psychology, it's ology, biology,
Yeah, the study of.
paleontology.
The study of.
Study of. Okay, so it's the study of the self.
And the soul.
And the
Yeah.
and the soul. And so how is that not bodhicitta?
Isn't it?
Works for me.
Here, here. Yeah.
Sandy has a question.
Please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I
we can.
was wondering if, thank you. I was wondering if you could give some more examples of agendas that parts might have, especially the ones that might be a little subtle and hard to recognize.
Yeah.
And thank you. This has been so interesting.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I mean, an agenda, it's real, like it can feel a little bit mind-boggling to our Western minds, I think, to imagine being a presence that doesn't have an agenda or has very little agenda, because we're so programmed to be doing something, period. Even if it's like, I need to help. I want to help. I want to heal. I want to listen. It's very subtle sometimes. And again, you don't have to throw it all out, but just noticing like, there's a little striving. That may be another way of phrasing it. If there's a degree of striving. And I'm not saying not to strive. We're not saying that these qualities are bad by any means, but there's something that is available and needed, a presence of acceptance and compassion and a kind of dropped in beingness that is willing to help, but it's like so patient that it's not going to force it. And parts will respond. They will, at some point sort of speak up and be like, oh, I really. So if the idea of, so the point is if you notice, let's say you're working with a part and you're checking for an agenda, you're like, am I, and if it's kind of like, no, not really, I'm okay to just be with it. And I care about it and I'm curious, you're on the right track. And then if you just notice some energy or some part coming in that wants this to be wrapped up at some point, that's an agenda. I would even argue like it wants it to be wrapped up in this lifetime. Like, can we bring the level of acceptance to a part of us that is sort of beyond, that's limitless? It's been a real growing process for me to understand that then doesn't mean nothing will happen. I think there's a fear that if I don't participate, if I'm not making, nothing will happen. And there's this sharing around, like, there's a healing that happens without effort. It's pretty magical when that self energy is just really present with a hurting aspect of ourselves. I hope that answers.
It helps.
Do you have a follow-up? I mean, you could totally retort.
Well, I don't know if this answers what you just asked, but I was, one of the parts I was working with was loneliness, and it was kind of funny to tell my loneliness that it wasn't alone. So,
That's awesome. How did that feel?
yeah.
How did that feel?
Kind of mind blowing. It kind of a relief. I sort of felt my throat opening a little. I'm dealing with a lot of grief and loneliness now, and recognizing and trying to tell let my self energy tell those parts that they weren't alone, and I was here for them. I sort of felt my throat open up in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
So that was
Wow.
good.
That's
I
very
feel more
beautiful.
grounded.
That's so beautiful. Well, now you're even less alone because we're all here with you listening. That's so profound. What a kind of revolutionary concept that we can tell a part of us that feels lonely that I'm here with you. You're not alone. Yeah. Well, yeah, Daniel.
This is, I hope this makes sense, but like whenever, people would, for example, would talk about processes of healing their inner child or wounded child, there's always a part of me that wanted to know if that was real. There's always something that felt a little hokey about it to me. And at the same time, I know through my own journey that there are like certain ways that I react or respond that are not coming from the part of me that where I feel right now when I'm like in a place where I feel
Yeah.
really safe and connected,
Yeah.
that are way more reactionary, almost like parts of me that I don't recognize at times.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, where are these parts? And maybe it doesn't matter, but just to help, there's something I'm very curious about.
And when you say where, like,
Like, is there a part of my brain where this one thing lives? Like, is this like kind of like some kind of stunted growth that, does it, that didn't get to complete?
yeah,
How do you think about that?
yeah. It's a beautiful, beautiful sort of question and inquiry. Well, this is what's coming to me. So, what I learned in psychology and the sort of the young self, the inner child, and healing the wounded child. So, if you were referencing kind of the brain, like when our brain is developing, we're learning about what's what. And if let's just say we're told like, you can't do it, or you've messed up. Let's just say, I'm just picking that as like a statement that would maybe come from a trusted adult or a teacher or someone in society, and you're young. That belief system that I can't do it or I'm not good enough does get kind of internalized as a truth at that age, because you don't really know any different. You're like, well, if you say so. And it often is so painful when it happens that it's ironically safer for you to believe that and self-police yourself than it is to think that the world is mean. It's safer when you're a little kid to believe that this isn't always the case, but that y'all are right because I need you to be right. I need you to be the solid walls of reality. And this goes on into teenagehood, you know, but especially when we're little. And like, there must be something broken here. That must be the case. It's ironically safer and easier for our systems to survive that way. And then that happens again and again. And we kind of develop these belief systems slash protections that are that aren't true. Like you grow up and you study Dharma, you study things, and you realize like that's not actually true. And yet there's a young part of you that's like been holding on to it since you were 5. And often in IFS and in other modalities, when you can really just bring pure self energy to that part, it's like so happy for you to help let it go. And even like sometimes we do an IFS where we actually have a sort of reenactment, if you will, where self goes into that scene and has a different outcome and actually protects that little kid or says, hey, no, that's not right. That's not true. You're awesome. You can do it. You can do it. Just try again, or something. Says something that should have been said. Yeah. That's one way of answering it. It's a
It's almost
potent
like
question.
an architecture that was built.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, neural pathways, we have like things that happen, memories get kind of imprinted. And every time we repeat that, it gets a little bit fatter and stronger, that neural pathway. And so often when we're changing and healing, there's kind of a habit thing. We have to kind of repetitively do something different and like let that part of your brain atrophy. Because a different story is taking over, a story that like you are loved, you are, you know, yes, you were wounded in that moment, but like this new thing, this new story, it's kind of mysterious and amazing, the healing that can happen almost through time and space.
So in your experience, it can atrophy. It's not just like, well, this is something I need to live with and learn to be with compassion, that there can actually be that level of change.
I think what can atrophy is the repetitive critical voices about it. Like the voices that are like, this is not like, you know, often we don't just like feel sad. There's usually like layers of like, you shouldn't be doing this. You know, you should get over like those voices. I think that habit can atrophy. I think the like fact that it happened and the wrapping it with compassion, yeah, I mean, you'll have a scar forever, but it'll also make you a more compassionate person.
Bodhicitta is towards the part.
Yeah. Okay, it's 8:30. Let's dedicate the merit of this night and the practices that we've done and the self-energy that we've felt and generated or intended to feel, and send that energy out into the whole world in every direction, in every past, present, future, to benefit and liberate all beings. And let them feel self-energy, let them feel their own bodhicitta nature. Thank you.